Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. If you enjoy these episodes, please take a moment to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform and follow this podcast on Instagram. If these episodes have been impactful for you, or you know someone that would benefit from one of these episodes, please feel free to share it with a friend. Your support means the world to me. Thanks so much for being here. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Bethany Noble, a Wyoming native, and she works as a science teacher. She is the owner of Wild and Pine and lover of Jesus and His creation. Thanks so much for being with us today, Bethany.
Thanks for having me, Mackenzie. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Why don't you go ahead and just share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Yeah, so like you said, I am from Wyoming. I own a shop called Wild and Pine and am on Instagram and kind of share my faith through that and share my love of creation through my shop. And I'm a teacher. I teach kindergarten through 10th grade at a small Christian school. I teach science to everybody. And then, I grew up in Wyoming. I went to college in Bozeman, Montana, which was really fun to kind of get to be in the outdoors there. And I lived in North Dakota for a while, and I was a church camp counselor, and that was something that kind of really shaped my love of the outdoors. And
Yeah. So talk to us a little about Wild and Pine. What is on that shop and kind of how was that born?
So I sell mostly stickers, and I have a few prints on there. I have a few shirts and a few tote bags and just a lot of random stuff, some pins. I'm trying to kind of get some more things outside of just stickers, but mainly my stuff is really focused on creation and how we can take care of it, how we can love it, and how we see God through creation. But yeah, I started it in 2020 as everyone started something. And it was just kind of an outlet for me to show my art and be able to be creative, because that's something that's very important to me. It kind of started out more of just faith-based. But over time it grew into just more of my love for the outdoors, which I think I always wanted it to be that, which I'm glad it got to end up being like that. So yeah, that's kind of what I do on there.
Yeah. Y'all go check it out if you haven't. It is the cutest stuff. I'm a huge fan. All the Bible verses that go with nature and just so much fun stuff. I know I was a big fan long before I ever got to meet Bethany and actually got to kind of partner together and give some gifts to our girls at our Christian Women's Retreat this past summer. And so super awesome and just love what you're doing. And I think a lot of what we're doing is similar, bringing Christ into the outdoors and kind of loving His creation and seeing Him through that. And so I just think it's so cool what you're doing, and keep it up. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
So talk to us about your love for the outdoors. What are kind of your go-to outdoor activities? How do you love to spend time in nature?
So usually what kind of a day in the outdoors looks like for me, I live pretty close to a couple mountain ranges in Wyoming. I live close to the Beartooths, which is kind of, if you go that way, you can end up in Yellowstone. And then I live close to the Bighorns, which is east of us. And that's usually where I spend all my time, either hiking, I kayak with my family, and sometimes we just camp and hammock and hang out, but mostly day trips or weekend trips in the mountains, just hanging out with friends or family.
Yeah. Is growing up in Wyoming, is the outdoors something that's always played a role in your life, or is this things you've done since you were a child?
Yeah, so this has kind of just been a big part of my life, most of my life, and we have we've been camping for as long as I can remember, and sometimes four-wheeling and hiking together. And more recently, when we got older, we bought some kayaks, and my family would go mostly on lakes and not in rivers and doing crazy stuff, but just kind of paddling around. And yeah, it's just so sweet to have a place where, you can do that kind of stuff and be able to just enjoy the outdoors with whoever. And it's just a couple hours away whenever you need it. And yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that you live in more of the flatter part of Wyoming, kind of like the plains, or do you live in the mountains?
So yeah, I'm kind of in a valley of, there's mountains on both sides, about an hour and a half to each side. So it's a little more flat where I live, but really close to the mountains, really easy to get there. So yeah, most of it's flat, and there's not a lot of towns in mountains unless you're in Laramie or Pinedale or Jackson, but yeah.
Yeah. I was just curious because I know that the western part of the state is kind of more mountainous, and then the eastern part of the state is definitely more plains and kind of farmland maybe.
Yeah.
And so I feel like people, whenever you bring up Wyoming, they're either why would anybody want to go there?
Mm-hmm.
Or they're Wyoming is so cool. It has so much outdoor stuff. And I'm it just depends on which side of the state you've experienced.
And there definitely is a lot of farming and ranching in this little valley, but there's a lot of people who spend their time in the outdoors, especially if you go, we're 30 minutes east of Cody. And that's more of an outdoorsy kind of vibe there. So yeah.
Yeah. So do you guys have really harsh winters?
No, not really.
No?
Yeah, it kind of hits the mountains and calms down. We get quite a bit of wind, and it does get pretty chilly, but not a lot of snow because it is kind of a desert in this area.
Okay.
So it's weird.
Yeah, I'm putting it all together.
Yeah.
I know where Cody is, and so I'm imagining. I'm just
Cody gets more snow than us. So
yeah,
because they're closer to mountains, but
very cool. So growing up in Wyoming, what has kind of become your favorite outdoor activity? I know you said more as an adult you do a lot of kayaking. Is that your favorite right now? Your biggest hobby?
I would say kayaking and hiking are probably my two favorites. Definitely, I think maybe more hiking is my favorite. But yeah, my husband and I will go on a hike and take our hammocks and set them up in the middle of the hike and just chill for a little bit and then keep on hiking. But I really love that because it's just a sweet time to, if you go with your friends or your family, it's just time to chat and to have fellowship with them. And you can just, I don't know, just be able to see a lot of different areas, especially if you're going on a long hike. You can see things up high, things in the forest. And I really love to be able to just look at all the little things the bugs and the mushrooms and the leaves and the trees and all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
we can definitely tell that you're a plants and animals kind of girl from your shop, and I love it. And you got to pay attention to those little things so that you can draw them, because there's a lot of detail in some of those small things.
Yeah,
we can tell you've been paying attention. So talk to us a little bit about how being in the outdoors plays a role specifically in your relationship with Christ.
Yeah. So kind of those things, those little details and stuff, those are really something that just points me to God and just points me to all of the little intricacies he has put into everything that he's created. And it's just so cool and so comforting to see how he didn't have to do that when he made the world. He didn't have to make this beauty and make all these little tiny details, but he did that, and he did that for us to enjoy, and he and to see him. And yeah, that's kind of one of the biggest things. And then, like I said too, about if you're hiking or just outside, whatever you're doing, you can have that time to fellowship with people around you, especially the mountains here. There's no service. You have to talk to your people. You can't just be on your phone still out there. You have to be, fellowshipping and just there with the people you're there with. So
Yeah, you have to be a lot more intentional in conversation and be a lot more present. And yeah, I think that's definitely one of the beautiful things is you are just a lot more intentional with the people that are around you. And we need more of that.
Yeah, definitely.
So can you share a story with us about a time in which maybe God has revealed himself or spoken to you through the outdoors?
Yeah. So when I was a camp counselor, some of the things we would do, you would have it was a church camp. So we would have our little bonfire or campfire, and we would just worship God around the campfire with all the campers. And that's just one of the most beautiful things to do, because especially like oftentimes it would be during sunset or, 10 o'clock at night, and you can see all of the stars, and it's just so much awe in that. And you can just feel God in those moments. And it would also be, we would go on camp outs, and we would take the campers and they would go in their little camp or their little tents. And what the girl staff would do, they would get together and like sing some worship songs together while the campers are like laying down for bedtime. And that was just so sweet, because it was just being able to worship with these women that you're serving with, and being able to like love them and love the campers that way, and show them your love for God by worshiping him in that moment. Those were always just such beautiful moments. And then yeah, more recently, like something that has happened that was fun was my husband and I were hiking, and we kind of just we stood there. We saw some birds that were cool, and we were like wondering what they were. And we had been like going through and trying to memorize Matthew 6, like how like we don't need to worry, like God feeds the birds, like how much more will he take care of us. And it was just one of those kind of moments, like we've been reading through that, we've been memorizing it, and then we get to sit here and like watch these birds just like, I don't know, they were kind of being playful and fun to watch. And just seeing how God takes care of them in that crazy like wilderness. We're in the middle of the mountains of Wyoming, and just watching these birds and seeing how God takes care of them was just, that was just a really cool moment. So so just things like that, little things.
Yeah. What age was the camp that you were a counselor at? Like, was it young kids or older kids?
It was, we would have a different group every week. So we did from pretty much 8-year-olds to 18-year-olds. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. So that was a big experience to be able to watch and worship around kids of all different ages, because they're all so different, and you can see that they all receive things a little bit differently. And what a cool experience.
Like aspects of seeing their childlike faith through whatever age they are in. And it's so beautiful.
And I love the story about the birds, because I think that when we read scripture, there are so many things that are tangible, analogies for us to look at and that we can actually see. And so I think that you having read that and then recognizing that in the outdoors is just so special, because before reading that, you may have just saw the birds and been like, oh yeah, they're birds and they're just being fun. But whenever you open scripture and you're studying certain things, like different things start to speak to you differently, and you begin to notice things that you maybe you wouldn't notice before. And so I just love how it comes alive, and how God has given us like little nuggets that we can actually go out and like see, instead of things that maybe we wouldn't be able to comprehend.
Yeah.
Because we have what's the word I'm looking for? Like example of that,
Yeah. Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So obviously you live in Wyoming, a really beautiful state, lots of outdoor access, but maybe for someone who lives in a more urban environment, maybe think like a big city, what are some ways or a piece of advice that you would give them to start connecting with God through the outdoors, even in those urban environments?
Yeah. So I lived in North Dakota recently, and I lived in like the capital of North Dakota, and it's not huge, but it's not, there's not a lot of outdoor activities to do in North Dakota. So I lived there for 3 years, and just moved back to Wyoming this year, but that was kind of one space that I did have to do that. I had to kind of figure out like, well, there's no mountains here. There's no really outdoor kind of scene here, besides pretty much hunting. And so I would go on walks with my friends. Mostly we would go to a park and just take a walk together. And those were really like sweet moments, because it was that time, like I said, to fellowship with each other. Just kind of put your phones away, put everything else aside, and just take a walk and be together. Or like sometimes my husband and I would kind of take a picnic blanket, take some food, go sit at the park and that kind of thing. And those were some good moments. And then, just anytime like you can take your Bible or just take a moment to sit outside and appreciate the sunset or appreciate the rain falling. Just any of those types of moments are just ways to connect with creation, even if you're not in a place where there's mountains and there's like hiking places and that kind of thing. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Go on a little walk, have a picnic. I always think that's a fun idea and I never do it. But every time I see people do it, I'm like, I should do that.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to eat food just sitting out in nature?
So
I'm always not the best at slowing down and like sitting in one place. I'm like, oh, let's just walk around. Mm-hmm. I like to be moving, but I need to do that. And I need to slow down and sit a little bit more. So you've talked multiple times about fellowshipping and kind of going on these walks or kind of fellowshipping with people. I think a lot of people have a little bit of a hard time doing that. I think that we get really stuck into the same kind of conversations or, hey, how's it going? That sort of thing. So in those moments, are you asking intentional questions? Like, how are you approaching those? Are you praying with them? I'd love for you to share just a little bit about that so that maybe we can all work on being a little bit more intentional in our time and conversations with people.
Yeah. So a lot of it will usually just be, because especially it's easier when you're with people you're closer to. But, if you're just trying to go out and just have a chat with somebody like your coworker who you're just trying to get to know, or a person you just want to, become friends with, I would say just being intentional and asking questions like you were saying, and trying to ask them like, how are you doing? Like if they need to let off a little bit of steam, like talk about what's going on in their life and just listen and hear them out. And a lot of times too, especially with my closer friends, we'll kind of just end up talking about theology and being like, hey, this is what I learned recently about the Bible, and then having a conversation about that. So yeah, just kind of being open and sharing like, what have you been learning lately? What have you been struggling with lately? What has been good in your life lately? And that kind of, I think if you just start somewhere, it'll open up a conversation, and God will use that to just, I don't know, have some like be able for you to have fellowship together and glorify Him in some way.
I like that. You said, what has been good lately? What have you been struggling with lately? And what have you been learning? I think those are awesome conversations or awesome questions to be intentional in conversation with people and to maybe push past those normal, just like, oh, I'm good. How are you? Kind of thing. And then maybe end up talking about something that really doesn't matter a whole lot. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know I kind of just threw that in there, but I appreciate you sharing that. I know I ask a lot of questions because I'm like, I struggle with this sometimes. Like, I'm really good if I know I'm having an intentional conversation with someone,
right?
But I'm not always good in those moments where it could kind of go either way. And so, yeah, that was helpful for me. So I know it'll be helpful for somebody else too.
Yeah. And it's like, I still struggle with that, and it's still hard to sometimes bring that up, but once you're friends and once you like know each other and understand each other, then it's not so weird. But
yeah,
if you're not like as close, then, just starting with getting to know them, talking about what they like and what you like and your interests and that kind of thing is a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you again for that. This is super helpful. So, switching gears kind of into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory, would love for you to share with the listeners a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced and just what God taught you or maybe prepared you for in that season.
So I feel like I have recently kind of just gotten out of a valley, and it's not like crazy hard stuff or anything, but I know a lot of people have struggled lately, especially like coming out of 2020, like how like the health of churches and how, I don't know, just the people in the church kind of act toward you and act toward the church and kind of their ideas of what church should be like versus what your ideas of church should be like. I don't know. It's just kind of been conversations that have been ongoing since then. But basically, like the whole time we were in North Dakota, it was hard to find a church that we agreed with and felt comfortable going to often, especially when it's in a bigger place. I don't love churches that are like have a lot of lights and fog and like there's a ton of people and you can't get to know anybody. That's hard for me. And that's what a lot of churches were in that area. And so it was hard to find one and kind of have a community in one. But I do think it ended up being kind of a healthy thing to kind of step back. It was hard while we were there because you feel a lot of guilt because you feel like, oh, I have to go to church or like I'm not being faithful to God. But it's not if you're still having fellowship with people around you, you're still finding ways to learn, you're still taking time for God. It's okay to take a break if you need that. And yeah, so we kind of did that and it was good and it was very helpful because now we have a church that we go to here that's less people. The people are intentional and get to know you and they choose to love you no matter what. And that's really sweet because it kind of like before I felt like I was very critical and very pessimistic towards people in the church, especially, I don't know, I was a campus ministry, like kind of a leader, like a Bible study leader. And it just felt like that campus ministry this was in college, that they would be like, how many people did you talk to? How many people like did you invite to your small group? How many people did you do this? And it was never like, did you have like good conversations with people? Are these people still coming? Are you walking with these people? Are you loving these people? It was like, how many? And that didn't feel really great to me. And that's kind of when we kind of started becoming a little more critical of the church, which was not healthy. But it was necessary for us to take a step back so we could become uncritical and kind of just heal from that. But yeah, so that was good. And now we're like in a church that we feel good about and we can just be walking next to people. And even if you don't have people in your church, like if you're not going to a small group, like just having fellowship with whoever you have around you is good. And just spending time with God and talking to your people about God is always going to be helpful, even if you're not like specifically in a church,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to maybe reiterate a few things that you said. Was you were very critical of the church,
Mm-hmm.
which caused you to step back from the church, which led to a lot of guilt because we are supposed to be in the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But taking that step back was necessary for you to maybe appreciate church again.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I love what you said. I'm very much on team that, we should and we need to be going to church.
Mm-hmm.
However, if we're not, there are still some things, that we can be doing. And I think that really at the essence, if we break the church all the way down, right, it's we're being led by somebody. We are in godly community. We are, in some way pouring into other people. And so, stepping away from church and kind of just not doing anything, is where there's always a little bit of problem. But I think that keeping those things that are still church-like and still kind of the foundations of the church are really important. And I think that it's cool that you were like, I'm really struggling with this, big C church, but I'm still going to focus on, little C church with the people around me and still be intentional and still, have kind of those core aspects of the church without being in the building, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of people struggle with church nowadays. And I think that that's becoming more and more popular. And there are a lot of churches that are focused on the numbers, just like you said, how many. And we've gotten away from really being intentional with the people that are there and making sure that we are equipping and developing and holding accountable, the people inside that building.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, without going on a big tangent about why the church is the way that it is, like, I think that's a core part of it is instead of developing the people within it, it's just all about numbers. And that's why we have so many, what I'll say cultural Christians is, they can show up and they can walk out and never be noticed. And, they're checking the box of church on Sunday, but they're not being held accountable. They're not, in some ways, the church isn't doing what it was designed to do, and definitely has gone to this more entertainment. You're talking about the lights and the smoke and all the things. And I think that some of those things can be good in
Mm-hmm.
some places, but it's like if we're having to entertain the people to keep them coming back, like it might be a problem.
Right. Yeah.
But anyways, I'll get off my soapbox about church. I think it's important, y'all. We're both saying it's important. And I think that what you did is important because I think a lot of people step back and they kind of just like cut off a lot of parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then it allowed you, from what it sounds like, to come back in a very different posture.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk to us about now what you see as a healthy church and what has been really helpful for you in this season coming back to the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think like the church I go to now, and I don't know, I can be a little hypocritical because I'm not in a small group at my church, but I do try to be intentional about having fellowship with people in my life who love the Lord. And I think that's okay. I don't think you necessarily have to be in a small group in your church, but as long as you're there, with other people in your life. And I think that's excellent. And yeah, so my church focuses very heavily on being part of each other's lives and just loving each other through every season you're in. And I think that's very important and very much what God wants us to do. That is exactly what Jesus was doing with his disciples. They were together all the time and they were eating dinner together. They were walking together. They were praying together. And he was setting that example for us. And then another thing, the worship, it doesn't need to be a show. You just need to come and be with Jesus. And I if people like that too, I'm not saying that's bad. I think you can still be a part of that and still love the Lord. But for me, personally, I don't feel like I am able to connect to God when there's so many other things coming at me in that moment. But yeah, so it's just more calm, you're focused on God, worship, and It also is like really about like, what is the pastor saying? Is he, only talking about politics when he's up there on the, like in front of everybody? Or is he only talking about like, cultural issues and what's going on in the world? Or is he going to the word every week and preparing a sermon out of what he's reading, and not just like picking a cultural topic from whatever's happening in the world and then like trying to talk about the Bible through that lens. Yeah, I think that it's very important to just be like, here's the word and here's what like we are learning from it. And yeah, I mean, that's just because that's what we're here for, that we're here to learn about what God's word says and not what the world is saying. So yeah, I just think those are kind of, for me, the more important things. And I know a lot of people, like some people will say like, well, worship's not like as important for me, like when I go to church, or like the singing worship, and so they will be okay with like a whole thing or whatever. But everyone has kind of a different like opinion on what they go to church for. So
Yeah.
And I think that's good too. But
yeah, I think two things about what you said. The worship, I don't really care what it looks like. It could be one person on stage. It could be a whole show. I think the question is if you're used to the whole show, in my mind, is can you still worship God when it's just one person, or when it's just, a guitar or whatever? Because I know for me, that was like something that I dealt with in or becoming a Christian. Was I kind of went to this really big church and there was a lot of that. And it wasn't so much about maybe the words as it was like the feeling. And so then I actually struggled a little bit going, the opposite direction, to a smaller church, because I was like, I'm not getting the same feeling, like what's going on, and it was because I wasn't paying attention to the words.
Yeah.
And I wasn't having the same posture maybe that I should in relation to that. And then secondly, with the Bible, I think you're so true, or so right. I think that when pastors talk about things from a cultural lens, it's not to say that those sermons are wrong and that they aren't helpful, but I think that whenever you interpret the Bible to fit a subject, sometimes people have an issue taking that core principle and applying it to other things. And so I think if we can teach people how to apply the principle of whatever the Bible's teaching into the cultural things, that's maybe the right path. But sometimes taking them and just, this is how you handle this one situation. It's like, well, that could be used to apply to so many other things as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
You kind of don't want to give them the full application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And like going back to what, like how you did worship and how that affected you, I feel like I'm the opposite. Like I grew up in a Lutheran church, which like they're just playing the organ and we're singing hymns, and that's how I grew up. And I'm not like, I go to a different church now, so it's different, and there's more people and you're not just singing hymns. But yeah, so I grew up in that, and so when it's everything else, to me, it feels like it's not always genuine, which, I mean, not genuine for me, I guess. It could be genuine for anybody else in the room, but not for me specific. And then I came from like, too, at camp, like we would just sing like with just a guitar around the campfire, or like when we were singing worship for our like kids going to bed, like it was just our voices, and that was like just a beautiful moment. And those were like probably the most genuine times of worship that I have experienced in my life, because it's just so like simple, and I like that.
I think this is such a difficult conversation for a lot of people, because people have a very this is the way church should be, and it's like, yes, and like I think there's beauty to all of it, and if people are worshiping God, and if that takes the lights and the smoke and whatever, then that's awesome. But I always ask the question, like, but can you do it without? And I think that's there's two sides to every coin, and, there's no 100% right way other than the posture of your heart in all of it. And so it's, we're not saying this is 100% the right way to do church. This is what, Bethany's experience has been and how God has spoken to her. But I think that, it's just always good to ask the question of, can I do, what we're going to talk about worship, like, can I do it without?
And it felt like when there was for me, when there was all the things, that is when I would become the most critical. It was and that was hard because it's then I'm not worshiping. I'm just being sinful and criticizing everybody. So yeah. Which is the opposite of what I should be doing in that moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because I think that sometimes those things can seem, or like we said earlier, they're entertainment. And so are people, truly worshiping God? And it can be distracting for some, and it can be good for others. And, it's interesting that all different churches exist, because, people connect with God very differently.
Yeah.
And, they all bring in different people, and they're all beautiful in their own way. But I think that's so cool. And it takes a lot of self-reflection to even notice that and say, this is taking away from my time with God and my worship of God. And, I think sometimes we have that feeling, but we don't do anything about it. And so I'm going to full circle back. I think that it's beautiful that you learned what you did and what is most helpful for you to serve the Lord the best that you can with the way in which you connect with him. And like we said, that's going to be so different for everybody, but finding it and taking the intentionality to do it, I think is huge.
And it just shows how God has just created everybody to have a different voice, a different opinion. And he's going to want you to come to him in whatever space works for you. And that's good. And yeah, and that's just a beautiful thing that he's made everybody so different in that way. And I mean, he says that in the Bible, that we all have different, some are the hands, some are the feet, and you can have a different opinion from someone else on how to worship God. And that's good. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you were speaking to someone who is going through a season of being critical of the church and maybe needs a little bit of space, or maybe needs to recalibrate, what advice would you give them?
So I guess some of the things that I was doing during that time, I found podcasts I like to listen to. I was usually I still listen to a podcast every single day and just to be learning different things about God. And because it's you're only your pastor or leader in your church does not have to be your only person you're hearing things from, and it's good to hear different things. So that's what I was doing. I was listening to podcasts. I was doing my best to be intentional about reading my Bible, and just as long as you're not totally backing away from God, because you can, like we've said, step back from the church, a church building, but you are still part of God's global church, and you're still a believer. And if you're struggling, it's okay to step back and but just still spend time with God, and don't take that to be you just need a break from everything, because you still need God in whatever season you're in. But yeah, and then talk to people about it. Anyone you can be honest with, it's okay to tell them, because especially if they're a believer and they love the Lord, I would hope that they're not going to judge you and tell you that you're doing a bad thing, and they would just find someone who will walk alongside you in that time and help you through it. Because I went through it, my husband and I went through it together. So it was we could talk about it and we could figure it out together. But yeah, if you have nobody, it's going to be hard to figure it out. So whoever you have, like, is a good person to talk to. But yeah, I don't know. I hope that helps. But
yeah, no, I think that's good. Surround yourself with believers. Don't stray away from that. Don't get out of God's word. If you need to listen and watch, I mean, I listen to different podcasts and different sermons all the time, even though, I'm actively going to church every Sunday. And so it's not bad. I think that we are called to be learning all the time about God. And so it's not just church on Sunday. And so however else you can get those things. I love what one of my friends, Pete Rogers, he said on a podcast I was on with him. He said, I think a lot of people, whenever they have a bad experience with church, they just stop going to church and they just they end going to church. It's like, no, if you have a miscooked steak from Outback, you're just not going to have steak from Outback. But you're not going to cut out steak,
Yeah.
And so I probably butchered that, but he said something along that, like, keep searching. Keep trying new things, new churches, but just like don't cut it out and don't cut out the church, even the Little C church and the people in the community.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. And just thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your experience with struggling with the church for a season. But I'm so thankful that you are back and you have found one that you feel happy, and feel the Lord at. And I think that's super special. And that's what we're all hoping for. And so I think it's always cool whenever people find what fits their needs in that season. And so for someone who wants to learn more about you, Bethany, or Wild and Pine, where can they find more information?
So I am on Instagram at Wild and Pine. And then I have an Etsy shop, Wild and Pine. Yeah, mostly it. So, I do have a Patreon. I forgot. That's new.
What is on the Patreon?
So what I've been doing on there is I will do some kind of freebies every month for one freebie every month for my free members, and then kind of just some extra content as much as I can, because I am also a teacher. So that's a lot. But so I'm on there and I do some freebies, and then I have 2 tiers you can sign up for. One is just a sticker club. You get a sticker in the mail, and one is a sticker and print club. So yeah, I just kind of announced what October's sticker and print is for the month, and yeah, it's kind of fun. So
very cool. Well, like I said, I'm a big fan, y'all. So go check it out. It's super cool. If you love the outdoors and nature and you love God and scripture, you're going to love Wild and Pine. So go check it out. And thank you so much, Bethany, again, for being here.
Thank you, Kinsey.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.